Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 21st of December, a special day here in Alaska, of course. It is the solstice, the winter solstice to be exact. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information any day of the year at 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, or if you have questions anytime, email me at david.snider@noaa.gov. So on about the solstice now. Why does this matter? Well, of course we know in Alaska that the Earth is tilted off its perpendicular axis by about 23.5 degrees, and because of that, the apparent track of the sun goes very close to and eventually below the equator. Because of that, we don't get a lot of direct sunlight during the winter months because the northern hemisphere is tilted away from that straight blast of sun. So as we go around in our orbit, eventually we'll come back around to a little bit more of a direct path going up above that apparent track of the sun. And with that, we get a little bit more direct sunlight as we go into the next 6 months. And boy, when we go through about the midway part of that path, it seems like we are just gaining minutes upon minutes every single day. And in about a week, you get an hour and sometimes even more than that. So good news, and today is the bottom of that time curve, so over the next several weeks, we'll start adding just a little more time, and eventually, as we get toward the equinox, that midway point, we're adding a tremendous amount of time each day. So if you've been in Alaska a short time or a long time, you know that today is a good day. The solstice occurred this morning at 7:28, December 21st. So enjoy that, and happy solstice to you and yours. Now, on to the more pressing matters there. High wind warnings in effect for the Bristol Bay region. We're going to see winds go pretty strong through this evening there, expecting those winds upwards around 45 to 65 miles an hour sustained. A lot of this will be out across the western half of the area that we've got shaded in red here. Gusts could be upwards of 75 miles per hour. It's going to go through at least tonight and into tomorrow evening for your Friday there. So a high wind warning out for the Bristol Bay region tonight. As we look a little bit further north, winter weather advisories for the Denali and eastern Alaska range area. These regions are probably looking at gusts, mainly in the passes, up to about 65 miles per hour. That means blowing snow is a problem, and it could limit visibility. So be careful if you're driving in the passes around the Denali region or the eastern Alaska range there. As you head up the road toward the Yukon Flats, blowing snow is going to be an issue there. That is also going to continue through at least 6 to about 9 o'clock tonight. A little bit further north into the coastal plain in the Arctic. Winter weather advisories continue there for blowing snow. That'll at least go through Friday morning and in some cases into Saturday for the northeastern sections there. For the north and western Arctic coast, winter storm warnings as you get down toward Wainwright, and the Kobuk and Noatak valleys there are expecting areas in that region to see at least 2 to 4 inches of snow, maybe as much as 6. And the high side there, that will go until at least 6 o'clock tonight. And areas along the Seward Peninsula, the north and south and the western side, all under winter storm warnings there. Again, some gusty winds with that region, as well as some light accumulations of snow, maybe just a touch of ice and glaze in there, but it looks like winter storm warnings are in effect for you this afternoon into this evening. St. Lawrence Island, still looking at some winter storm criteria or some weather there, expecting that to last until about 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Could see anywhere from about 2 to 4 inches in general. On the high side, you might see as much as 7 inches on a local basis. But again, watch for some areas of glaze and ice because there's a lot of open water in the region. So no surprise if you get a little bit of ice on top of the snow and the blowing snow. So winter storm warnings in effect for you. The Yukon Delta also expecting to see about 3 to 4 inches of snow in the region there. You're under a winter storm warning. So a lot of wind, a lot of snow, and in some cases some poor visibility because of the snow that's already on the ground. So be advised, not a whole lot of a change there across many parts of west and northwestern Alaska. And for many in the east, just continued issues with wind and a lot of wind around the Bristol Bay region. So Awful lot going on once again around your part of Alaska, most likely. Here's a look at the satellite picture over the last 12 hours or so. You can see a pretty steady and healthy southerly flow working its way up across the YK Delta through Bristol Bay and into the Bering Strait. Once again, that southerly flow is pretty much stayed intact across the same regions there. The eastern areas and southeast have enjoyed generally calm weather compared to what we've been seeing out in the west. Now, breezy conditions there will continue for southeast, and we expect more of the same tomorrow. In the meantime, storm force winds across many sections of the central and eastern chain, the northern Gulf continuing in the marine regions there. And so it's snow and wind across the western and northwestern interior, wind blowing snow across the east, occasional fair weather gusty conditions across southeast, and then storm force winds as these waves of weather are moving through. You can see low pressure here across the western Bering Sea slowly dropping southward. This is kind of the back side of this whole circulation, and this is trying to allow some significantly colder air down from the north. The problem is this is a really complicated pattern, and this low is moving northward, trying to push warmer air back into eastern sections of Russia. All the while, it would be natural for colder air to drop southward. So look at this complicated weather picture here. We have high pressure that's pretty big for itself, 1,048 millibars for wintertime. If this were any other December, this would be some really nasty cold stuff, but it's not. I mean, it is cold, but it's not really that cold. Temperatures around Northway will probably drop into the -15 to -20 range here in the next couple days, but most of the rest of the interior doesn't look to be that cold, really, so it's kind of strange. Low pressure here across the Bering, 984 millibars. The warm air wants to go this way, the cold air wants to come this way. Nobody's winning. We draw it as a stationary front. Here's an occluded front across the central and southern Gulf. That's really going to kind of fizzle out. Again, the cold air really wants to push eastward, and it makes a little bit of progress into the Gulf tonight. Most of what we'll see across the Gulf will be rain. Southeast stays dry and clear. A little bit of fog up around the Copper River Basin there. You might see that on the aviation charts in a little while as an area of IFR. A lot of that should probably mix out in the afternoon tomorrow. We'll see. It's had trouble today. Areas across the western Brooks Range still looking at snow. Same goes for the Seward Peninsula. There's a little bit of ice there perhaps tonight around the Yukon Delta, and snow and wind for the Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island and Gamble and Savunga. What a mess. As low pressure continues tracking eastward slowly, you see this front kind of wiggle a little bit, but not much. So I'm trying to represent that on the map. It seems to be a very strange weather pattern for me. Periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rainfall across southwest, but Kodiak Island looks like you could see several inches of rain there, 3, 4, high side maybe 5 inches of rain in some cases. A really steady stream of very wet weather moving your way for Friday. A lot of that gets left on the Aleutian Mountains, and then not quite as heavy rain across parts of southwest. And then as we get up north, you're looking at periods of snow for the Seward Peninsula, the northern Yukon Delta, as well as St. Lawrence Island. That's your winter storm warnings we were just talking about. And wind. The crossed arrows here, of course, mean blowing snow, poor visibility expected in those regions. And the same goes for the Denali area in the eastern Alaska Range, as well as areas out over the ice. And one thing we will talk about coming up here in a little bit in the marine section is the change in the ice around the Chukchi Sea. You'll want to see that here in just a few minutes. Snow showers may still be possible around the Aleutians as we go through Friday and again into Saturday. Low pressure is still sitting here across the western Gulf. It does not move very much, but it does bring up another frontal boundary across the Gulf. This will start to move some clouds closer to the southern sections of the outer coast of southeast, but you still look to be fairly dry. But do notice that tight pressure gradient here. You know what that means. It means it's going to be some strong winds in the region from time to time, but perhaps not a full-on gale just yet. We'll see. Areas of blowing snow across south and western Alaska and the western Alaska Range, and high pressure across the northwestern Bering Sea at 1,009 millibars, trying to kind of get a foothold there. But look, the overall weather pattern is still this big low here across the northern Gulf, and the pressure gradient defines that well into the Yukon Delta and the southern Bering Sea. So we have still got a big ball of wind here across the eastern chain and southwestern Alaska, snow across the Bering Strait, and still an opportunity for some mixed precipitation across the Yukon Delta, but mainly wind and generally clear conditions across the north, central, and southern interior of the Yalkan, looking clear, southeast looking clear, out west just unsettled, even though that ridge of high pressure is trying to set up. Let's take a look at your temperatures in the morning. Remember I said Northway could be cold. I didn't have it quite right. I said 15 to 20 below. How about 28 below in Northway tomorrow morning? That's cold. 4 below in Eagle, 10 below in Fort Yukon, but really, we're talking winter solstice temperatures here. This is not that cold, is it? Not for a almost 1050 high sitting here out across western Canada. Minus 28 there, northway perhaps in the morning. Southeast, you're looking at teens and 20s and some wind. 15 to about 25 degrees or so from the Kenai Peninsula eastward into Prince William Sound, 5 around Talkeetna, 13 in Barrow, 27 in Nome. Southwest, you're looking at mid to upper 30s, almost 40. Again, remember, there's a lot of wind coming over the mountains at you, too. 33 in St. Paul and St. George, 20s and 30s out across the chain to the Alaska Peninsula. Tomorrow, almost 50 degrees, again, because of some of the wind roaring over the mountains. Don't be surprised to have warm but very windy weather. 36 around Nunivak Island, 32 in Nome. Ambler, you're looking at 24. Anaktuvuk Pass, about 14 in Ambler, 24 in Anaktuvuk Pass. 21 around Barrow, minus 2 for a daytime high in Fort Yukon. And then you're seeing Northway warming up to minus 13. That's what I was thinking of. 20s and 30s for South Central. 43 in Kodiak, but wet. And 30s for most of Southeast for your daytime on Fridays. We get into Saturday morning. Fairbanks down to 6 below. Now we're kind of talking some winter cold for you. 16 below in Fort Yukon. 10 around Kaktovik, 8 around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Kotzebue Sound temperatures, including Shishmaref, in the mid-20s. 28 in Nome, 28 as well for Savunga and Gamble. For the southwest coast, Yukon Delta region, you're looking at mid to upper 30s to almost 40 degrees around parts of Bristol Bay, about 40 in Kodiak, upper 30s to mid 40s there for the Alaska Peninsula, 29 around St. Paul and St. George, and teens and 20s for Saturday morning in Southeast. What about the afternoon? Back in the 30s and 40s there. Look at the cold trying to take over the interior. That makes sense with high pressure sitting here finally, but all the focus for warm and wind is way out across the west. Try saying that 5 times fast. Out around Kotzebue Sound to Norton Sound and southwest, you're still looking at temperatures that are at or above freezing. A very impressive warm-up with that strong, gusty, southerly flow. And again, that looks like that'll continue into Sunday.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now for your Friday morning. IFR will continue around St. Lawrence Island to St. Matthew and the Pribilofs, Nunivak Island, and the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula. Watch for patchy IFR as you head through Tanita Pass. A lot of that will go away quickly. And VFR should be pretty widespread for southeast, south central, the interior, and the north slope. As we get into the afternoon, you'll notice some breaks in the IFR around Bristol Bay, but should continue around the Bering Strait communities into areas around Kuskokwim Delta, St. Matthew Island, same places around the Pacific coast and the Alaska Peninsula, and AKwx down toward the southern end of Kodiak Island. It's still fairly clear and flyable for many across the interior and for parts of southeast. Once we get into Saturday afternoon, we'll start to see more widespread improvements in the IFR coverage for the west, though Etoll and Strait and areas outside of the Kuskokwim Delta up toward Ammonik, we'll still be looking at some patchy areas of IFR and VFR across some of the Beaufort Sea coast there to the Chukchi coast and many areas along the Bering Sea, as well as parts of Cook Inlet and Shelikof Strait, and starting to work its way into areas just outside of Prince William Sound. Southeast still looking pretty good through Saturday afternoon. Most of the interior should be okay. Most of Northwest looks all right, and IFR conditions around St. Lawrence Island down toward Nunivak Island, west toward St. Matthew, and then another disturbance working into the western Bering will start to produce another region of IFR as we get into your weekend. Here's a look at your pass conditions now. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass we expect to remain at VFR as we start up your Friday there. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass expected to be MVFR in the morning, but improvements noted throughout the day. As we get into Rainy Pass, look for VFR conditions there. Windy Pass looking pretty good so far. Isabel Pass expected to start at IFR, heading to VFR conditions there. Mentasta Pass looking okay for your Friday. And Tanita Pass, we expect to see IFR, at least in the morning, some patchy areas, and then a quick improvement throughout the day. Portage Pass and Chilcoot and White Pass also expected to be VFR. Friday morning freezing levels show some colder weather dropping southward across the western Bering, but really the changes will be out across the north and western Gulf. You can see levels there as high as 2, maybe even 4,000 feet across parts of the central Alaska Peninsula, and out across the Gulf nearing 2,000 feet close to Yakutat. Everywhere else just kind of hit and miss across the interior. At about 2,000 feet or below the surface freezing line, hovering near Nunivak Island down toward about Kashamak Bay and the northern Gulf all the way down the outer coast of southeastern Alaska. What about icing potential? The main thrust of moisture is still that southerly band around a ridge of high pressure that's kind of angled right about here, and that keeps us in that southerly and very wet Pacific flow across southwestern Alaska, Kodiak Island down toward Cold Bay and Falls Pass, all the way through looks like the Bering Strait. Those levels at or about 2,000 to 3,000 feet for most areas. The major concern will be out across the west for the considerable moderate potential there. So keep your eyes on the icing there, as some of that will be fairly low. Jet stream potential has that high pressure ridge locked in place now across the interior. That's going to keep us dry at least for the next couple days for most parts of the interior, south central and southeast. You can see that northwesterly flow coming down the eastern side of the ridge at 90 to 100 knots, 75 to 100 knots on the western side. Again, that's attaching that stronger southerly Pacific flow and latching into that main storm track. That's well to the south of the Gulf of Alaska. The high pressure anchor is kind of out here south and west of California and the western coast of North America. At 9,000 feet, you can see that broad southerly flow working across the Gulf, 40 to 80 knots coming in from the south. Wind speeds slow down a little bit across the Alaska Range, and they're fairly slow and light from the north across parts of southeast. Strongest winds out here across the western chain, 35 to 40 knots there. Southerlies working through the Bering Sea at about 40 to 50 knots. At 3,000 feet, our high-pressure ridge is right across the Alcan border there with a south and easterly flow over the Gulf. Light winds across southeast again under the direct area of the ridge itself. Southerlies across most of the interior really pick up in this fashion, anywhere from 40 to about 60 knots. Southerlies across the west coast and northwesterlies across the chain about 20 to 40 knots. So let's take a look at turbulence then. You are going to have some rough rides across some parts of western Alaska. There is an opportunity for turbulence to reach as high as isolated severe from Kotzebue Sound to Norton Sound to Bristol Bay down toward Kodiak. There's a much better chance you're going to have considerable moderate in this area, but it is going to be below 5,000 feet as well. So there's going to be a lot of fast moving wind as you saw in the 3,000 foot winds there. Those speeds are certainly picking up there. So tomorrow, despite areas that might have okay visibility and ceilings, the turbulence and maybe even the icing potential as well, certainly some big factors in flying across western Alaska. Watch for considerable moderate across the central and eastern chain through the Alaska Peninsula and as far east as Prince William Sound, the Kenai Peninsula and the Alaska Range. And again, there's some rough rides and some tough flights there if you do manage to make it through. Stay with us. We'll be back with your marine forecast here in just a few.
Real reason for the seasons.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're here to help you find your way around the sky tonight.
The winter solstice is Thursday, December 21st, and sun worshippers can finally rejoice. This is the time when the Northern Hemisphere experiences the shortest days and longest nights.
Wait a second. Rejoice on the shortest day? What's to celebrate? Sounds like lots of darkness.
Well, every day after December 21st, the sun will get higher in the sky and stay up longer above the horizon. The sun will stop its southward migration and start heading north again.
I wish it would hurry up already. It's freezing out here.
Let's show you the reason for the seasons.
The changing seasons are caused by one thing, the 23.5-degree tilt of the Earth. As our planet rotates daily on its axis, we also revolve around the sun. But our rotational axis is tilted compared to our orbit around the sun, and we always keep this slanted view.
When we, in the northern hemisphere, are tilted most directly toward the sun, we soak up solar energy to the max. That day is called the summer solstice, and it occurred on June 21st this year. At this point, the sun's rays shine most directly on the northern hemisphere. We get more energy per square inch, and thus it's hotter.
Now, the opposite occurs when the Earth swings around to the opposite side of the sun. Here, we in the northern hemisphere are tilted away from the sun. The sun's rays feebly strike us at a low angle, spreading out the same energy over a larger area. Each square inch gets a lot less energy than in summer. We call this the winter solstice, and that occurs on December 21st this year.
The sun's output is the same all year round, but the difference in our seasons is how much of that energy we soak up. It has nothing to do with how close or far we are from the sun. We're closest to the sun every year in January and farthest from the sun in July. So the distance doesn't cause the difference in the seasons. Hey James, you staying cool?
The sun is blasting off my hair.
Oh, you're doing great. Now let's see how our tilt affects the view from down on Earth. Oh, sorry about your hair.
It's okay, it'll grow back. Anyway, we have our skies set to December 21st, just before sunrise. Let's trace the path that the sun takes across the sky on this, the shortest day of the year. The sun will rise south of east and reach its highest point in the southern sky around noon. Then the sun will set south of west.
For most of the country, you'll get about 9 to 10 hours of daylight on this day. That also means you'll get 14 to 15 hours of darkness.
Let's compare this to the spring equinox. Next year, it'll be on March 20th. Now, let's trace the pathway that the sun takes on this day. The sun will rise due east, reach its highest point above the southern horizon, and then set due west.
Notice how the sun went higher in the sky than it did in December. The higher the sun, the more direct energy we get.
And look at how much longer the sun was in the sky. 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. Equal day, equal night, and that's why we call it the equinox.
Now, what about the summer solstice? Now our sky is set to June 21st, and we can watch the sun rise north of east, go very high in the south, and set north of west.
The sun went higher still in the sky, and the hours of daylight reaching a whopping 14 to 15 hours for most of us in the U.S., with only 9 to 10 hours of darkness.
And all of this is caused by the 23.5-degree tilt of the Earth. So, on December 21st, watch this extreme southerly sunset.
And in 6 more months, it will reach the other extreme, northernmost sunset on the summer solstice on June 21st.
Soak up the solstice sun because the longer days are returning and summer is coming. Slowly. Keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a quick check of your sea ice edge. The Chukchi Sea is still seeing some more open areas, maybe not entirely open in the blue shaded regions just west of Barrow where the ice has been moving from east to west. But in the Chukchi Sea, there absolutely is open water north of Point Hope now. This entire region has been seeing that very strong southerly warm flow, and the wind has probably been more of a culprit than the temperatures, but the temperatures haven't helped. Once the wind settles down in this region, and that could be sometime next week or in the next week and a half, this entire area has sea surface temperatures that are primed and ready to freeze quickly. So there will be new ice, and quickly, once the ice settles down. But in the meantime, south-facing or north-facing coastlines are pushing their ice towards south-facing coastlines. So places in Norton Sound, places in Kotzebue Sound, probably seeing a lot of that ice move northward toward those south-facing coastlines there. So watch for ice to stay on the move. You can always check the latest at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. Here's a look at southeast weather now. Northerlies will continue. Small craft advisories for many locations. Gusts to 35 knots out of the Lynn Canal with 4 to 5 foot seas in many areas. A strong east and southeasterly flow is really focused a little bit further out to the west, but along the outer coast, 25 to 30 knots there, 9 to 10 foot seas on Friday, and you see that coming up sharply to anywhere from 16 to about 17 foot seas there as we get into Saturday. Southeasterlies don't really pick up that much, but it's that outer band of that next round of weather getting a little bit closer, driving up the seas. So watch for that. Northerlies on the inside passages, 20 knots, 4 foot seas there. Southeasterlies inside the Clarence Strait with a 3 foot sea on Saturday. Across the northern Gulf, look for some high seas there, east of the Barrens especially, 26 footers there with a 50 knot wind. Storm force winds will continue through tonight and into tomorrow, at least 50 knot winds there. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet, 25 to 30 with 6 to 9 foot seas. Easterlies inside of Prince William Sound as well, 25 knots with a 6 foot sea. On Saturday, easterlies continue, still looking at 6 foot seas inside of Prince William Sound. The winds coming down just a little bit more across the southern Cook Inlet, but still 35 to 40 knot winds off the Kenai Peninsula. Look for 10 to 17 foot seas. They're really picking up sharply as you come out of Kachemak Bay. And then easterlies come down just a little bit more in the north and western Gulf, 45 knots with a 25 to 26 foot sea on Saturday. Across Bristol Bay, look for a storm force wind inside of Bristol Bay itself. Again, high wind warnings on land. That'll go through tonight and into tomorrow. 13 to 14 foot seas there in the lee of the Alaska Peninsula. On the Pacific side, you're looking at 35 to 45 knot winds sustained, anywhere from 23 to 29 foot seas expected on Friday. That comes down just a little bit on Saturday. Easterlies inside of Bristol Bay improving to 35 knots with 10 foot seas. Northerlies on the backside of the low pressure system, 40 knots with 22 foot seas. Look at the seas here extending outward toward the Pribilofs. They're also looking at some higher seas in that direction. And again, some of the highest seas out in the western and northern Gulf. For Friday in the chain, look for west and northwesterlies in the western end, 20 to 25, 15 foot seas between Adak and Kiska. West and northwesterly winds through the central and eastern chain, 40 to 45 knots, 21 to 22 foot seas expected there. 23 foot seas between Atka and Nikolsky with a 45 knot wind on Friday. By Saturday, that surge pushes eastward again. You can see the Pribilofs and out toward Bristol Bay, as we just saw a moment ago. Westerlies 35 knots with 16 to 21 foot seas in the east. For the central chain, as low as 9 foot seas there north of Adak and Atka, 10 to 13 foot seas on the Pacific side, and westerlies from Kiska to Attu, 25 to 30 knot winds expected on Saturday. For the west coast, southeasterly winds, storm force winds once again from Korik down into Togiak and the Kuskokwim Delta, 20 foot seas expected there. Southeasterlies bringing 16 to 17 foot seas north of Nunivak Island to St. Lawrence Island, and over the ice 35 knots in Norton Sound. The winds diminish there a little bit on Saturday. Northerlies north of Nunivak Island, easterlies over the Kuskokwim Delta, 35 knots with a 12-foot sea, and westerlies over St. Matthew, with the Pribilofs looking at northwesterlies at 30 knots with a 12-foot sea. And for the North Slope, easterlies across the Beaufort and the ice, southeasterlies 20 to 35 knots with 7-foot seas outside of Kotzebue Sound. As we get into Saturday, those winds continue, 35 knots with a 7-foot sea. Southerlies blowing up through the Bering Strait, 35 knots with a 13-foot sea. And once again, the Bering Strait is open right now. Pretty impressive stuff. Let's take a look one more time at your weather charts. Low pressure out across the Bering Sea at 976. We'll be working up the west coast. Strong southerly winds there. High wind warnings for Bristol Bay. Winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories for many along the west coast. Those will continue tonight and at least into tomorrow. Blowing snow for the eastern and central Alaska range passes there. As we go through Friday, periods of heavy rain for Kodiak Island. Breezy conditions for southeast, but fair weather for you and for many across the central and eastern interior. Cold there. It looks like temperatures going well below zero for places like Northway in the next couple nights. Low pressure sitting across the northern Gulf will continue.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.